Yeah, so, I mean, whoever wants to respond to this, do you feel like when you're talking to someone and they're being vulnerable, that you feel a stronger connection to that person or not? Do you relate to somebody who always seems perfect? No, right? We don't because none of us are perfect. This has been a struggle for me in my life. The kind of message that I had growing up was that I had to appear perfect to everyone else. And once I started realizing that that was a wrong way of thinking about things and was more vulnerable about sharing the things that I struggled with or that I went through, I started feeling so much stronger connections with people who would come to me and say, hey, that thing you talked about, I experienced that too, and appreciated you saying that, or whatever it is. And then you start engaging in a real and meaningful way. Mary? Yeah, Corey? Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. So how do you think the lack of acceptance of your own imperfection gets in your way when you're trying to develop a relationship with God? Bill, you don't think you need Him? Okay, so if you basically deny your imperfection, yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. Any other thought? Or maybe you understand you're imperfect, but you think that makes you unworthy, and therefore, I think somebody said this earlier. Therefore, you shouldn't even be talking to God, right, Aaron? I'm not sure about that, to be honest. Um, I don't know that it depends on other people accepting my imperfections for me to acknowledge them to God. I think the main point here is if you think that I'm not, if you try to be disingenuous in your interactions with another person, to put up a fake front, a perfect front, then there's not going to be a real connection made there. It's when you're genuine and you are vulnerable and you own up to the things in your life that are wrong that you'll make a connection with somebody else because they have things in their life that are wrong too. And so if you translate that to God and your prayer life to God, you're going to be more willing to go talk to Him and say, you know what? I did it again. I mean, I prayed for forgiveness this morning, and here it is in the afternoon. And I did the same thing again. I'm really struggling with this. And talk to Him about it and own up to it and have a genuine conversation. the bottom line here for this one is, don't let your unworthiness steal your salvation. Don't let the struggles that you have get in your way of developing a relationship with God. Yes. Yes. Correct. Yes. Yes. That's a perfect example. Thank you, Gary. Oh, go ahead. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And if Paul could struggle with that the way he did, then surely we're all struggling with it, right? And we need to be honest and genuine with God about that. I have a verse here for us to consider, Hebrews 4:15 and 16. "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." And that's what you were talking about. A lot of times we let this get in the way of having access to grace that God freely gives, that he invites us to come to him. And Jesus is there. I always think of it like Jesus standing next to God when I'm praying to him, and I say, I'm struggling with this thing, and Jesus goes, yeah, that's a tough one. I had a hard time with that one too. He's not. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Okay, step number 2. Show up. People who offer their true presence and focused attention to others enjoy a more intimate relationship. true? What does it look like if I don't show up, if I don't have focus or you, like in your relationship with whoever's most important to you? What does it look like for you or them to show up without true presence and focus? While you answer that, I'm going to check my emails. Go ahead. Yeah. Right? Today we live in such a distracted world. Even when we're physically with someone, we're not present. We're not focused. And countless studies show that when you are focused, when you're in the moment, when you're focused on a person, I think we talked about this before. We have these mirror neurons in our nervous system to where when we're talking to somebody, eventually our hearts will sync up and have the same rhythm. That doesn't happen if you're not actually making a strong connection. So the same way we need to show up with people in our lives, we need to show up with God. So what does that mean? What does showing up for God look like? I'm sorry? Focusing on Him, okay, and how? Yeah, so prayer is very important in that. When we have a prayer, when we pray to God, are we focusing? Are we truly present? Are we saying a prayer that we've said a bunch of times before and we kind of go through it and we get through it and it's done and we've checked it off the list? Or are we really saying, I want to talk to you about what happened to me? Or I want to talk to you about what I think might happen to me today because I need to be prepared. Dan? Yeah, that's a great point. And you can make a parallel to that with Bible study and God, right? He sent us His Word to read. Did you read that? Well, not that part. I skimmed it. It's the same kind of thing. And I may or may not like ask questions or make comments about something that was just discussed and not have heard it. Don't ask her about that. But I may have done that a time or two. Any other thoughts on this one? Matthew 6:34, and I'm using the Message on this one because I really like the way it reads here. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now. Don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. A lot of times, the other thing that we do here, maybe we are talking to God, but we're so focused about talking to Him about things that we think we want to happen that we're not really concentrate on the work that He's doing in our lives right now. And we miss out on opportunities and we miss out on being grateful for the blessings that we have today because we're thinking about the blessings we want for it. Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Any other thoughts? Okay, step number 3, find time for solitude. People who spend time away from the world have a renewed mind and better understanding of what matters most. We started this whole class talking about Jesus and how even at the beginning of his ministry, when he was more busy than he had ever been, he got up early in the morning, he went to a desolate place, and he prayed. Is that something we should be doing today? I think it is. Um, how many of you have ever come across anybody on the internet talking about, I spent a week away from social media, and how refreshing it was, and I couldn't wait to get back on here and tell you all about it? Right? They run right back to it. But having time away from the distractions of the world, we understand that as being energizing and refreshing. But do we do it when it comes to our spiritual life? And how does it affect our relationship with God? Any thoughts? Especially since this is a class on prayer and a lesson on better prayer life. What does it look like to find time for solitude? So you're saying, yeah, you find time to spend with God. You try to spend time with God throughout the entire day. Yeah, He's always with you. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it because He really is. Yeah, yeah. That reminds me when the girls were little, very little. We had in our van, we had a little TV with a built-in VCR. For you really young folks in here, a VCR is this cassette tape that we would record things on. And we had like an extended play VHS tape with Disney Channel just, recorded on there. So they were constantly watching. And one day, I don't know what it was, tape broke or something, but it didn't work anymore. The TV didn't work. The girls were very upset about that. And I remember saying something like, use the time to think. Think about, what's going on in your life and where you want to be going and the things you want to accomplish. And they looked at me like I was a total idiot. Because it's like, no, 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 no. We need the noise, or we need the entertainment, or we need the whatever. I mean, how many of us have something on in the house all the time, no matter what, anyway, right? Just playing in the background. We like, to your point, we can find that time to get away where it's silent. I think we don't like being left with our own thoughts sometimes, but we really need to do that in order to think about who am I and how am I, what are my goals in life? How am I doing? Bill? Yeah. does. When you're surrounded by things that are very obviously man-made, it's a different feeling than when you're out and amongst the things that he made. I think I've talked about this before, getting my routine, which I've admittedly gotten out of since the weather got cold, but was to get up early in the morning and take a walk around the neighborhood. And as the seasons were changing and the leaves would turn colors, and there would be all of these signs of God's handiwork just right there. And it would be, something to think about and to talk to him about and be thankful for. And yeah, I think that's a great idea, being out in nature. Did I see? Yeah, and it's the same thing with like exercise too, right? You have to deny yourself what you might do otherwise to go to the gym and work out. But if you can get to the point where it's like, I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to that time I take early in the morning where I talk to God. Then it changes everything. All right, we're going to need to move on here. Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. By testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. When we find time for solitude, we find time to make sure that we're not conformed to this world. And we allow God and his word to transform us. Step 4. Are you a giver or a taker? People who seem primarily concerned with what they can get from others have a harder time building relationships. Is that true? Yeah, makes sense. So, what do you think you are in relationship to God? In your relationship with him, are you a giver or are you a taker? Like, which word best defines kind of the overall vibe, as the young kids would say, of your prayer? You give off a giver vibe? I'm just entertaining myself at this point. Or a taker vibe. Anybody want to share their thought? I think that's the default, isn't it? Like, let's go to God and ask him for whatever it is that we want. And when things are going well, we kind of stop talking to him as much, right? What would it look like? What would your prayers look like if you were more of a giver? Hmm. Yeah, right. I agree with that. But I would also add that if you read David's Psalms, when he gets to the point where he's asked for something, forgiveness or whatever it is, he always follows that with, and here are the things that I'm going to do for you. I'm going to sing your praises. I'm going to invite others to sing your praises. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to worship you. I'm going to whatever. And so I like that whole, what's the balance between gratitude, thankfulness, and asking. I would just add a third category in there of how much time do we talk to him about helping us find ways to serve. Yeah, yeah. I think that's right. I mean, there's no formula here, right? You don't plug in the variables and get a number and go, oop, that was a good prayer, right? But these are thought-provoking questions that are relationship-based that I think are good to think about. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, that's a good point. Sort of the context of the praying and making sure you're praying in multiple contexts so you have like a different perspective when you pray. Um, yep, that's right. Absolutely right. Yeah, that's a really good point. Mm, yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. Okay, Psalm 116. What shall I render to the Lord for all his benefits to me? I will lift up the cup of salvation and call on the name of the Lord. I will pay my vows to the Lord in the presence of all his. Just underlining that idea that God does so much for us. We should be thinking about how we can give to him or through him give to others. Yeah, I like that. Okay, step number 5. Speak your mind. People who engage in open and honest dialogue have less resentment, more trust, and better understanding. Anyone disagree with this? No one's willing to say they disagree with it? Maybe we all agree with it. Anyone good at this? Yes. We all agree with that too. We have a hard time speaking our minds. We want to hint around it. We want to dance around it. We want to be passive aggressive. We want the other person to get the hint and change their behavior. But when they don't, we get all resentful because they didn't pick up what we were putting down. Right? But if we had just said what was on our mind, chances are we could get to a better place. Not only fix the individual thing, but in a relationship, get to a better place, a stronger place, a closer place to one another. And the same thing is true when we talk to God. What does it look like to speak your mind to God? What's that? Job, okay. Being vulnerable. Yeah, and I think I've told you the story, so I apologize. I tend to tell stories over and over. But a turning point for me on this one was I remember I was driving through Crestwood, and I just decided I was going to tell God how angry I was. Because I grew up with a mother who had borderline personality disorder, and then I had a daughter who some have diagnosed with borderline, among other things. I was like, I lived through it here. Why are you giving it to me over here? I'm very angry with you. Haven't I done enough? Haven't I lived through enough? And that was just like so cathartic. And it's like this burden just lifted off of me because I was resenting God or a situation in my life that I felt like he specifically put me through, or at the very least was unwilling to let me out. By the end of the prayer, hearing it out loud, realized how ridiculous. And it got me past that resentment to a point where I could say, wait a minute, he's been with me in my childhood. He's been with me raising my daughter. He's going to always be with me. And I have been overlooking those blessings and that benefit because I've been dwelling on pity for myself. And so I would strongly encourage you, if you want to have a better prayer life, if you want to have a closer relationship with God, talk to him. Just tell him what you feel and don't be afraid of it. Gary? Yes, he is. It was, yeah. Yeah, yeah. It is. It absolutely is. Yeah, you say it out loud, and then they go, oh, I had no idea you felt that way. I'm so sorry. And then you're like, oh, I thought they were doing that on purpose. Something's going on over here I want to know more about. And yes, you're right about David. I was very tempted to put a Psalm of David, but I did Habakkuk instead. Oh Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Oh, cry to you violence, and you will not say, why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? That seems pretty harsh. That seems like a hard thing to say to God. You know, like, why are you not hearing me? Can you imagine saying that to God? Why are you not hearing me? I'm sorry? Why have you forsaken me? Absolutely the same thing. We need to learn how to do that if we want to have a better prayer life. Last step, find common interest. This one came from a TED Talk with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. And they've been friends forever. People who intentionally strive to find and share common interests with others tend to enjoy longer lasting friendships. And I think the crux of the talk was finding, like Jane Fonda would find something that she really liked, that she thought Lily might like, and she would send it to her ahead of a planned visit so that when they got together, they could share it and talk about it and experience it. I like that. I like that idea. Finding common interest with someone you want to build a relationship with, and then finding ways to share that interest with them. How does that apply to God? How does that apply to our prayer life? One of the things I've said a number of times in this class is that the main point is always aligning your prayers with God's will. So you want to have a common interest with God? Figure out what God likes, what God wants, and then align your life to it. Align your prayers to it. We get caught up in praying for things that we want without thinking sometimes about whether or not it's something God would want or that God would want for us. So I have Psalm 25 here. Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me, for you are the God of my salvation. For you I wait all the day long. And this feeds right into the Bible study portion of the class. Right? You want to know what God likes, what his interests are, study the Bible. He tells us. It's actually kind of easy. Any thoughts on this before we close the class? Okay, next week we're going to talk about 6 steps to developing a Bible study plan. And then because I combined the Bible study methods classes into one, we'll probably have to do like just a review for the very last class. All right, thank you very much. thought I just had one, but Maggie told me I had two.